She was a virgin, 19 years old, and had a past no one knew. He was a millionaire devastated by a love that ended in death. When their paths cross, desire turns into redemption or condemnation. But what she whispered that night, no one ever forgot. If you like stories of love and romance, watch until the end, you won't regret it. Subscribe to this channel and leave your comment saying where you're listening to this beautiful story from. We continue. On the highest hill of Newport, amidst abandoned gardens and winds carrying the scent of the past, stands Beaumont Manor, a grand and opaque edifice, surrounded by centuries-old araucaria trees and secrets petrified within its walls. The house, inheritance of a dynasty born of scandals and fed by silences, now belongs to Adrian Beaumont, 42, a pharmaceutical executive, the solitary heir to a fortune he never wished to bear. Tall, stern, with eyes sharp as ancient blades, Adrian carries in his gaze the resignation of one who has buried everyone who dared to love him. His coldness is not arrogance, it is a mechanism for survival. Since the unexplained death of his fiancée 20 years prior, he has lived as a spectre of himself, keeping a distance from anything that might remind him he still breathes. The grey June morning sky seemed to mirror Adrian's mood as he observed the estate from his office window. The mist descending from the hills enveloped the manor's contours like a protective veil, isolating it even further from the rest of the world. This was how he preferred it, distant, inaccessible, forgotten. The household staff knew not to interrupt his moments of silent contemplation, except in case of emergency. And that was exactly what happened when Mrs. Olivia, the housekeeper who had cared for the manor for over 3 decades, knocked on the door with unusual urgency. "Dr. Beaumont, forgive the intrusion, but your Aunt Augusta is on the phone," she said. "It's urgent." Augusta Beaumont, the family matriarch, rarely made contact. At 82 years old, she lived reclusively in an isolated wing of the property, supposedly limited by the progressive blindness that had afflicted her in recent years. Adrian knew that behind that apparent fragility hid a woman of steel, capable of manipulating people with the precision of a maestro. If Augusta called him, there was a purpose. "Nephew, I've found the ideal person." Her voice sounded firm, almost jovial. "A young lady to keep me company with my readings. Recommended by Father Anselm from St. Clare's Convent. Aunt, we've discussed this. We don't need strangers in the manor." "It's not a request, Adrian. It's a warning. She arrives tomorrow." A brief silence. "You've neglected your old aunt for too long. Perhaps a young presence will bring some life to this house of the dead." Before he could respond, she hung up. Augusta had always been like that. She decided and communicated, never consulted. Deep down, Adrian knew it was pointless to argue. The matriarch still held an invisible power over the family, even after having transferred control of the Beaumont enterprises to her nephew. The next morning, the fine constant rain formed curtains of water cascading down the hillsides. The family driver had been sent to pick up Augusta's new companion at the train station. Adrian remained in his office, determined to ignore the arrival of the unwelcome visitor. But something bothered him, a restlessness he couldn't name, as if the air in the manor had changed its density. When he heard the car arrive, he couldn't resist. He discreetly approached the window overlooking the main entrance, and that's when he saw her for the first time. Helen Villa stepped out of the car with restrained movements, yet without hesitation. She held a small worn leather suitcase and looked at the manor with an expression that was not one of awe, as might be expected, but of recognition. As if she had been there before. At 26, she did not possess the obvious beauty of the women who usually circulated at the social events Adrian was obliged to attend. There was something different about her. Her translucent green eyes contrasted with the brown hair, framing a face with firm features. It was not a beauty that begged for attention, but a presence that demanded it effortlessly. Raised since adolescence in St. Clare's Convent, in rural New Hampshire, after losing her parents in an accident, Helen grew up among stone walls, prayers, and silences. Her only wealth was the books in the convent library, ancient poems, forbidden novels, diaries of women who could never be free. Nourished by this internal universe of contained desires, she developed a restless intelligence, an acute perception of others' silences, and a quiet courage that disconcerted without warning. The opportunity to work as a reading companion for the Beaumont matriarch arose through Father Anselm, who had known Augusta for decades. Helen didn't have many options. The convent was closing due to lack of funds, and the idea of working in an isolated manner, reading to a blind lady, seemed preferable to seeking employment in the big city without any experience or contacts. What she didn't know was that the invitation came from much further away, from a forgotten history that ran in her blood. Helen arrived at Beaumont Manor with the eyes of someone who had never truly been seen, and the heart of someone who, nonetheless, deeply wished to be recognized. Mrs. Olivia received her at the entrance, with the warm formality typical of old housekeepers. "Welcome, dear. Mrs. Augusta is eager to meet you. But first, let's get you settled. Come, I'll show you to your room." Helen followed the housekeeper through the manor's corridors, observing everything carefully. The walls were covered with dark wood panels and paintings of somber landscapes. The Persian rugs muffled the sound of footsteps, creating the sensation that they were floating through the halls. There was something about the house that intrigued her, an inexplicable familiarity, as if every corner hid a secret she already knew but couldn't remember. Her room was on the second floor, in a wing distant from the main body of the manor. It was a spacious room with a four-poster bed, a carved wooden desk and a window overlooking the back gardens. There was something in the decor that seemed strangely personal, as if it had been prepared specifically for her. The bathroom is at the end of the corridor. Meals are served in the small dining room at 8 a.m., 1 p.m., and 7 p.m. Mrs. Augusta usually receives visitors for reading after breakfast. For about 2 hours, Mrs. Olivia paused as if measuring her next words. "Dr. Beaumont prefers not to be disturbed. He works in his office during the day and rarely joins for meals." Helen nodded. She had expected this. What she didn't expect was the shiver she felt when Mrs. Olivia mentioned the owner's name. "And what about other family members?" she asked, trying to sound casual. "There are no others, dear. Just Dr. Beaumont and Mrs. Augusta. The Beaumonts were never known for large families, and the few that existed—" She didn't complete the sentence, but her gaze said it all. "Rest a bit. In an hour I'll take you to meet Mrs. Augusta." Alone in the room, Helen unpacked her small suitcase. She had brought little, some simple clothes, a notebook, and 3 books she considered too precious to leave behind. She approached the window and observed the property that stretched as far as the eye could see. Abandoned gardens, a dry fountain, paths that disappeared among centuries-old trees, and in the distance, almost hidden by the mist, a small glass pavilion like a greenhouse. The rain had let up, but the sky remained heavy. Helen felt an inexplicable impulse to explore outside, as if something were calling her. But she knew she first needed to meet Augusta Beaumont, the woman who, unbeknownst to her, would change her destiny forever. Augusta resided in the east wing of the manor, in quarters adapted for someone with visual impairment. When Helen entered, led by Mrs. Olivia, she found an old woman sitting in a burgundy velvet armchair surrounded by bookshelves reaching the ceiling. Despite her completely white hair pulled back in an impeccable bun and hands marked by time, Augusta Beaumont emanated an aura of power that contradicted her supposed fragility. "Come closer, child. Let me feel your face." Helen obeyed, kneeling before the lady. Augusta's hands touched her face with a delicacy that bordered on reverence, like one recognizing something precious. "Yes, exactly as I imagined. You have skin as soft as your mother's." Helen froze. "Did you know my mother?" An enigmatic smile crossed the matriarch's lips. "I've known many people in my long life, dear. Sometimes I confuse faces in my memory." The young woman felt there was more to that statement, but she didn't press. Augusta changed the subject, explaining her expectations. Helen should read to her every morning, organize her correspondence, and occasionally accompany her on short walks through the indoor gardens. In the afternoon, she would be free to explore the property, as long as she didn't disturb Adrian. "My nephew is a difficult man. He carries burdens you couldn't imagine. But he is a good man beneath all that layer of ice." Augusta paused as if assessing the effect of her words. "You will start tomorrow. Today, familiarize yourself with the house. Oh, and child, be careful with locked doors. Not all secrets in this manor should be discovered." Was it a warning? Or a disguised invitation? Helen couldn't decipher it. After leaving Augusta, she decided to explore the manor on her own. She walked through the silent corridors, observing the details, the wood carvings, the rug patterns, the paintings on the walls, almost all portraits of Beaumont family members across generations. She noticed that many of the paintings seemed to have been removed, leaving lighter marks on the wall, as if part of history had been deliberately erased. It was while she was examining one of these marks that she heard firm footsteps approaching. She turned and found herself before him, Adrian Beaumont. Up close, he was even more imposing than she had imagined. Tall, broad-shouldered, impeccable posture. He wore a dark grey dress shirt and black trousers that accentuated his elegant figure. But it was his eyes that captivated her, dark, deep, laden with a sadness so dense it could almost be touched. "Lost, Miss Villar?" His voice was grave, controlled with a slight tone of irony. Exploring, "Mr. Beaumont, there's a difference." Helen did not lower her gaze. As most people did before him, something flashed in Adrian's eyes, surprise perhaps. Annoyance? It was too quick to identify. "My aunt has an idealized view of the need for companionship. I hope you won't be disappointed when you discover the work is more monotonous than it seems." "Monotony doesn't scare me, Mr. Beaumont. I grew up in a convent, remember?" A tense silence settled between them. Helen could feel something growing in that space. It wasn't just the natural antipathy of a man who preferred solitude. It was something more complex, a kind of mutual recognition that neither of them could name. "There's something familiar about you," he said abruptly. "Have we met before?" "I don't believe so, Mr. Beaumont." "Adrian. You can call me Adrian." "Mr. Beaumont makes me feel like my father." A trace of bitterness colored his voice when he mentioned his father. Then Adrian, "No, we've never met." "I would remember." He studied her for a few more seconds, as if trying to decipher a riddle, then nodded briefly. "Welcome to Beaumont Manor, Helen. I hope you find what you're looking for here." And before she could answer, he walked away down the corridor, leaving her with the disturbing sensation that she had just participated in a conversation much more significant than the words exchanged suggested. The afternoon wore on, and with it, the clouds darkened the sky further. Helen decided to return to her room. On the way, she passed a half-open door leading to a smaller, more intimate library than Augusta's. She peeked inside and saw floor-to-ceiling bookshelves, a rolling ladder to reach the highest volumes, and an unlit fireplace dominating one of the walls. Yielding to curiosity, she entered. The scent of old books and polished wood filled her senses. She ran her fingers over the spines, reading titles in Portuguese, English, French. Many were first editions, rare works she had only seen mentioned in other books. She was so absorbed that she didn't notice Adrian's presence until he spoke. "This was my mother's private library. No one has been here for years." Helen turned, embarrassed to have been caught in a room that was clearly not for common access. "Forgive me, the door was open." "And you can't resist books, it wasn't a question. Augusta told me about your passion for reading. That's why she chose you, I imagine." "Books were my refuge in the convent. I learned more from them than from the sisters." Adrian approached one of the shelves and took out a volume bound in red leather. This was her favorite. Wuthering Heights, a peculiar taste for a woman who appeared so docile. "Appearances can be deceiving," Helen replied. "Perhaps your mother had a storm within her like Catherine Earnshaw." He stared at her, surprised by the precise reference. "You've read it?" "Many times. It's one of my favorites, too." Something shifted in Adrian's expression, a small crack in the armor of coldness he maintained. For a fleeting instant, Helen glimpsed the man behind the mask, someone deeply wounded, who had closed himself off not out of cruelty, but out of self-preservation. "You can come here whenever you want," he said, putting the book back on the shelf. "These books deserve to be read, not just admired from a distance." Helen felt the weight of those words, which seemed to refer to much more than just books. "Thank you. I must warn you, however." He hesitated as if weighing his words. "This house has a complicated history. Not everything you find here will be pleasant." You're trying to scare me, Adrian." A minimal, almost imperceptible smile touched his lips. "It wouldn't be necessary, would it? You don't strike me as the type to be easily scared." "I'm not." "Then we understand each other." He turned to leave, but stopped at the door. Without looking back, he added, "Be careful with my Aunt Helen. She rarely does anything without a hidden purpose, especially when it comes to bringing strangers within these walls." With that he left, leaving Helen alone among the silent books. and the growing feeling that there was much more to that house and to Adrian Beaumont than she could imagine. That night in her room, Helen couldn't sleep. The storm that had threatened all day finally broke with fury over Newport. Thunder shook the windows, and lightning illuminated the room in ghostly flashes. But it wasn't just the storm keeping her awake. There was something in the manor that unsettled her, a presence, an energy that seemed to call to her. She got up and went to the window. The rain lashed the gardens, transforming them into a wild and primitive landscape. It was then that a particularly strong lightning flash illuminated the property, and she saw a figure standing in the rain, looking up at her window. A woman in a white dress, her dark hair fluttering in the wind. The flash lasted only a second, and when another lightning bolt cut across the sky, the figure had disappeared. Helen felt her heart race. Had it been imagination? A trick of the light and rain? She returned to bed, but sleep did not come. Instead, fragmented dreams invaded her semi-conscious mind. Visions of a crying woman, of a locked room, of blood-stained hands, and in all these dreams a voice called her name. Not Helen, but Lena, a name no one had called her since her mother's death. The next morning, Helen woke with an inexplicable certainty. She had not been brought to Beaumont Manor by chance. There was a purpose behind her presence there, and somehow that purpose was linked to Adrian, to matriarch Augusta, and to secrets long buried in the Beaumont past. What she didn't know was how much that past would demand of her, and if she would be willing to pay the price. The days at Beaumont Manor soon established a routine that, though predictable in its structure, hid layers of tension and mystery that accumulated like the mist that frequently covered the gardens. Every morning, Helen read to Augusta for 2 hours. The matriarch preferred Gothic novels and biographies of powerful women in history. During these sessions, Augusta occasionally asked Helen personal questions, always casually, as if not attaching importance to the answers. But the young woman perceived that each piece of information was carefully stored. "Did your mother like music, Helen?" she asked one morning as the young woman paused her reading. "Yes, she played the piano. It's one of the few memories I have of her." "And what music did she play for you to sleep?" Helen felt a shiver run down her spine. "How do you know she played for me to sleep?" An enigmatic smile crossed the matriarch's lips. "That's what mothers do, isn't it? They play for their children to sleep." This wasn't the first time Augusta had shown knowledge of details from Helen's life that hadn't been shared. Small fragments of information that, isolated, seemed like coincidences, but together formed a disturbing pattern. In the afternoons, Helen explored the manor and its surroundings. She discovered that the Beaumont property stretched for several acres, including part of the hillside. There were abandoned trails, small ruined buildings, and, of course, the glass pavilion she had spotted on the first day. She approached it several times, but something always prevented her from entering. An unnamed unease, a premonition. In her explorations, she occasionally crossed paths with Adrian. He seemed to appear in the most unexpected places, as if monitoring her movements, though he always maintained the pretense of casual encounters. Their conversations were brief, laden with attention that went beyond the words exchanged. Helen began to notice how he watched her, when he thought she wasn't looking, not with desire, but with a kind of painful fascination, like one contemplating something simultaneously precious and dangerous. One particularly humid afternoon, when the fine rain created a translucent curtain over the landscape, Helen was in Adrian's mother's library, absorbed in a volume of poetry by Cecilia Mireles, sitting in an armchair near the window. She didn't notice his presence until his shadow fell across the pages. "I sing because the moment exists and my life is complete," Adrian quoted, looking over her shoulder. Cecilia always had the gift of capturing the ephemeral. Helen closed the book, marking the page with her finger. "You know her work well. My mother loved Brazilian poetry. She made me memorize verses when I was a child." A fleeting smile crossed his lips. "She used to say that men without poetry in their hearts are only half men. And do you agree?" Adrian moved away, going to the unlit fireplace. "There was a time when I did. And now? Now I believe some hearts are better kept silent." He turned to face her. "Poetry demands a dangerous openness, Helen. Not everyone can afford that luxury." There was something in the way he pronounced her name, as if testing the sound, the taste of the word on his lips, that sent a shiver through her body. not of fear but of recognition, as if a dormant part of her being was being called to life. "You always speak in riddles." "Adrian, it's the only safe language in this house." At that moment, a powerful thunder shook the windows, and the lights flickered before going out completely. The library plunged into gloom, illuminated only by occasional lightning flashes. Power outage. It happens frequently during storms. Adrian moved with familiarity in the dark. There are candles in the desk drawer. Helen fumbled until she found the drawer. Her fingers touched something cold and metallic before reaching the candles. She pulled out the object, a small silver key delicately crafted, with a design of intertwined roses on the handle. "What is this?" she asked, illuminating the key with her phone's flashlight. Adrian approached quickly and took the key from her hand. For an instant, their fingers touched, and Helen felt an electric shock run through her body. "Nothing important." His voice sounded tense. "Just an old key, this house is full of them." But Helen had seen the flash of recognition in his eyes, the moment of panic quickly masked. That was no ordinary key. It must open something very valuable, judging by your reaction. Adrian put the key in his pocket. "Not everything that's locked holds value, Helen. Sometimes we lock things just to protect ourselves from them." The conversation was interrupted by Mrs. Olivia entering, carrying lit candelabras. "Dr. Beaumont, Mrs. Augusta is asking for you. She seems agitated by the storm." He nodded. "I'll go to her." Before leaving, however, he looked at Helen one last time. "Remember what I said about locked doors in this house." After he left, Helen remained in the library, feeling that something fundamental had changed in that exchange. The key, the warning, the touch, everything seemed part of a ritual whose rules she didn't know, but whose consequences she was beginning to sense. That night, Helen's sleep was disturbed by vivid dreams. She saw herself walking through the manor's corridors, following the distant sound of a piano. She reached a locked door, and in her hand was the silver key with roses. When she opened the door, she found a candle-lit room, and sitting at the piano was a woman with her back to her, her long black hair falling like a waterfall. The woman turned slowly, but before Helen could see her face, she woke up, her heart pounding. The next morning, after the reading session, Helen decided to question Augusta. "Does the manor have a music room?" The matriarch, who had been almost asleep during the reading, opened her eyes with a sharp movement. "Why do you ask?" "Curiosity. That seems like the kind of house that would have a piano at least." Augusta adjusted herself in the armchair. "There was one in the past. It was in the West Wing, the one that remains closed." "Why is it closed?" "Some places hold too many memories, child. Memories that are better left dormant." Augusta made a gesture as if swatting an invisible insect. Adrian ordered it sealed after Eliza's death. It was her favorite room. "Eliza?" Helen felt her heart race. It was the first time she had heard that name. "His fiancée. She died 20 years ago. An accident, or so it was declared." Augusta's voice took on a bitter tone. "She was talented at the piano, played Chopin as if she was born for it." "How did she die?" Augusta turned her face towards Helen's voice, and despite her eyes opaque with cataracts, she seemed to see her with supernatural clarity. "Ask him if you dare, or better yet, don't ask. Some wounds should not be touched." "You seem to like her." "Like her? Perhaps." Augusta smiled, a joyless smile. "She was special. There was something in her blood that made her different. Like you." Helen felt her skin prickle. "What do you mean, like me?" But Augusta had already closed her eyes again, signaling that the conversation was over. "I'm tired today. Continue reading tomorrow." Dismissed, Helen left the matriarch's quarters with more questions than answers. Eliza. The name echoed in her mind like a lost musical note. Adrian's dead fiancé, a pianist who died under nebulous circumstances, and for some reason, Augusta saw similarities between her and Helen. That day, the rain let up, allowing the winter sun to appear between scattered clouds. Helen decided to take the opportunity to explore the more distant gardens of the manor. She followed a trail almost overgrown with vegetation, which snaked between ancient trees until it led to a small artificial lake. By the water's edge, there was a moss-covered stone bench, and behind it, almost hidden by the vegetation, a neoclassical mausoleum. She approached cautiously. The mausoleum door was ajar, as if someone had been there recently. On the pediment, the name Beaumont was engraved in large letters, and below a Latin inscription, Memento Mori, remember that you will die. The interior was cool and somber, with niches in the walls housing urns and small identification plaques. Helen's eyes scanned the dates and names, mentally tracing the family tree. It was then that her gaze settled on a more recent plaque. Eliza Montague Beaumont, 1976-2003. Below the name and dates there was an inscription, "The music silenced but the melody remains." Helen felt a chill. 2003. 20 years ago, as Augusta had mentioned. Eliza would have been only 27 when she died, just 1 year older than Helen was now. She would hate to know she's here. Adrian's voice startled her. He was standing at the entrance to the mausoleum, the backlighting turning him into an expressionless silhouette. She detested this place, said the dead should rest under the open sky, not trapped in stone boxes. He approached, stopping beside Helen, but family traditions rarely take individual wishes into account. "I'm sorry for your loss," Helen said, genuinely touched by the pain emanating from him. "It's an old story." "Not that old. 20 years is less than a lifetime." Adrian looked at her with intensity. "Some losses mark time differently, Helen. 20 years can be an instant or an eternity, depending on what was taken from you." "Were you together for a long time?" "Since adolescence," she was. He hesitated, searching for the word. "Luminous, the opposite of everything this house represents. How did she die, if you don't mind me asking?" A heavy silence settled between them. For a moment, Helen thought he wouldn't answer. "Officially, an accident. Fell down the main staircase during a storm when the lights went out." His voice was controlled, but Helen could feel the underlying tension. "Unofficially, some say it wasn't an accident." Who would say that? People who believe this house has its own ways of eliminating those who don't belong to it. A bitter smile touched his lips. Superstitions, obviously. But in families like mine, Helen, the line between superstition and truth tends to be blurred. The wind had picked up, making the trees around the mausoleum groan. Scattered raindrops began to fall, foreshadowing another storm. "We should go back. It's going to rain heavily again," Adrian said, but didn't move. "You still love her?" It wasn't a question. His eyes, when they turned to Helen, were filled with such raw pain that she almost recoiled. "Love doesn't die with the person, Helen. It just transforms into something darker, heavier." "Like guilt?" Adrian stared at her, surprised by the accuracy of the observation. "You are too perceptive for your own good. And you carry too many burdens to carry alone." Something shifted. In the air between them, an electrical tension that wasn't there before. Helen felt her body react involuntarily, as if every cell recognized his proximity. "There are things about me, about this family, that you don't know." His voice was almost a whisper. "Things that, if you knew, would make you run far away from here. Or maybe not." Helen met his gaze. "I have my own secrets, Adrian, my own ghosts." Thunder echoed in the distance, and the rain began to fall harder. But neither of them moved. They were caught in a moment out of time, where past and present merged into something dangerous and inescapable. "You remind me of her." Adrian's words came out like a painful confession. "Not physically, but there's something about you. The same light, the same defiance in your eyes." "Is that why you can't look at me? Because you see a ghost?" "That's why I can't stop looking at you." The intensity in his voice made her tremble. "And that terrifies me more than any ghost could." The rain was now falling heavily, but they remained in the relative shelter of the mausoleum. Helen felt a drop run down her face. Or was it a tear? She couldn't tell. She only knew that something fundamental was changing within her, as if a veil was slowly being lifted. "What happened to the music room?" she asked, abruptly changing the subject. Adrian seemed momentarily disconcerted by the question. How do you know about it? Augusta mentioned it. Said it was sealed after Eliza's death. Some doors should remain closed, Helen. His voice took on a warning tone. Please don't look for that room. Why? What's in there? Memories, and perhaps answers no one is ready to face. The intensity of the rain lessened a bit, allowing them to hear someone calling in the distance. It was Mrs. Olivia looking for them. We should go, Adrian said, moving towards the exit. Helen followed him, but before leaving the mausoleum, she cast one last look at the plaque with Eliza's name. For an instant, she had the impression that the letters glowed, as if illuminated by an inner light. She blinked, and the impression disappeared, but the feeling that something or someone was watching her remained. The following days were marked by a strange dance between Helen and Adrian, seemingly casual encounters that felt carefully orchestrated, conversations that said more in silences than in exchanged words, glances that lasted a second longer than they should. The tension between them grew like the pressure before a storm, something palpable that everyone in the house seemed to notice. Mrs. Olivia, in particular, observed the rapprochement with worried eyes. One morning, as Helen helped organize Augusta's medications, the housekeeper broke her usual silence on personal matters. Be careful, child. This house, it has ways of hurting those who get too close to its secrets. Helen stopped what she was doing. Are you talking about Adrian? I'm talking about everything. About the Beaumonts, the man of the secrets. Mrs. Olivia lowered her voice as if fearing to be overheard. Dr. Beaumont is not a bad man, understand? But there are shadows in him. Shadows that don't just come from loss. What shadows? It's not my place to say. The housekeeper seemed genuinely fearful. Just know that nothing in this house is a coincidence. Your coming here has a purpose. What purpose? If I knew... Mrs. Olivia sighed. Mrs. Augusta plays a long game. And you, child, are an important piece in it, though perhaps even she doesn't know exactly how. Before Helen could press for more information, Augusta called from the adjacent room, and the housekeeper quickly moved away, leaving Helen with another fragment of the enigma surrounding her. That afternoon, the rain finally gave a prolonged respite, and the winter sun illuminated the drenched gardens. Helen decided to take the opportunity to explore the glass pavilion that had so intrigued her. In daylight, the structure was even more impressive, a Victorian greenhouse with colored glass panels forming geometric patterns on the vaulted ceiling. The interior was an abandoned botanical paradise. Exotic plants grew haphazardly, some escaping their pots and spreading across the tiled floor. Vines climbed the iron columns. Wild orchids bloomed in shaded corners. In the center, a dry fountain with the statue of a woman pouring water from a jar. Except there was no water, only moss and dry leaves. Helen walked through the space, absorbing the details. There was a melancholic beauty in the decay of the place, as if nature was slowly reclaiming what men had tried to tame. In a more secluded corner, she found a small iron table and on it a book protected from the environment by a glass case. Curious, she approached. It was a diary, its red leather cover faded by time and humidity. Carefully, she opened the case and took the volume. On the first page, in delicate handwriting, was written, Diary of Eliza Montague, 2002-2003. Helen's heart raced. The diary of Adrian's deceased fiancé, abandoned in that place for 20 years. Should she read it? It would be an invasion of privacy. But something within her insisted that this encounter was not accidental, that the diary was there waiting for her. She opened to a random page, dated January 2003, just 3 months before Eliza's death. Music has become my only refuge. When I play, the voices silence, the gazes disappear. Just Chopin and I, existing in a space where neither Augusta nor her secrets can reach me. Adrian senses that something has changed, but I can't tell him. How can I tell the man I love that his family is built on lies, that his own blood is not what he thinks? The truth would destroy him, and I wouldn't be responsible for that. But the silence corrodes me from within. Yesterday I found the locket in the old room, the one with my mother's family symbol, the same one I saw around Augusta's neck when she thought I wasn't looking. The pieces are falling into place, and the picture they form is terrifying. The diary slipped from Helen's trembling hands. Blood, lies, secrets. What had Eliza discovered, and how did it connect to her death? "You shouldn't be here." Helen turned abruptly. Adrian was standing at the entrance to the pavilion, his expression unreadable. This place was special to her, he continued, approaching slowly. She came here to think, to be alone when the pressure of the house became too much. Helen looked at the diary lying on the floor. Following her gaze, Adrian picked it up. His face paled as he recognized the object. "Where did you find this?" His voice was tense. "It was on the table inside that glass case," Helen pointed. "I didn't intend to invade anyone's privacy, but curiosity was stronger." There was no accusation in his voice, only a kind of resignation. "Did you read it?" "Only one page." She hesitated, then decided to be honest. "Eliza mentioned secrets about your family, about blood and lies." Adrian closed his eyes for a moment, as if absorbing a physical blow. When he reopened them, there was a new determination in them. "Come with me." He turned and left the pavilion, the diary held firmly in his hand. Helen followed him, fighting the urge to ask where they were going. They crossed the gardens in silence, entered the manor through a side door, and ascended a service staircase she had never noticed before. They reached a corridor on the 3rd floor, in a part of the house Helen had never explored. Adrian stopped before a door sealed with wooden planks nailed in an X. He took the silver key with roses that Helen had found in the library from his pocket. "This is the music room," he said, his voice low. "No one has entered here since the night Eliza died." "Why are you showing me this now?" "Because you've seen too much to turn back. And because—" He hesitated. "Because there's something about you, Helen, something I can't explain. But that makes me trust you when all logic says I shouldn't." With a decisive movement, Adrian tore off the planks blocking the door. The wood gave way with a groan, revealing a double door carved with floral motifs. He inserted the key into the lock, which turned with difficulty after years of disuse. "What happened here?" Helen asked, feeling the weight of the moment. Adrian looked at her, his dark eyes reflecting a pain that seemed infinite. "The truth, Helen, is that even I don't know for sure. I found Eliza at the foot of the stairs that night. But before I heard her play, in this room, the same melody repeatedly, as if in a trance." He pushed the door, which opened with a ghostly creak, revealing a dimly lit room, frozen in time. "Welcome to the room where it all began. And where it all ended." The music room seemed to exist in its own dimension, suspended in time. Dust motes danced in the sunbeams that entered through the gaps in the heavy curtains. A Steinway grand piano dominated the center of the room, its black surface faintly reflecting the diffuse light. Yellowed sheet music was scattered on the lid, as if the pianist had just risen for a brief intermission, an intermission that had lasted 2 decades. Helen felt the air dense, laden with memories and emotions that seemed ingrained in the very walls. There was something in the atmosphere that made her feel simultaneously an intruder and deeply familiar, as if she had been there before. "Eliza spent hours here," Adrian said, his voice low as in a church. "She said it was the only place in the manor where she could truly breathe." Helen approached the piano, delicately running her fingers over the yellowed keys without pressing them. A thin layer of dust covered everything except, "This key is clean." She pointed to a single key in the middle register, an F sharp. "Someone has been playing it." Adrian approached, his expression of surprise giving way to visible unease. "Impossible. No one has been in here for 20 years. I sealed this door myself after the funeral." "Then how do you explain this?" Helen gently pressed the key, which emitted a perfectly tuned note in contrast to the room's abandonment. Adrian didn't answer immediately. His eyes scanned the room, as if searching for signs of intrusion. This house has always had its mysteries. Some things defy rational explanation, like Eliza's death. The question hung between them like a physical presence. Adrian walked to a small bookshelf on the side of the room and took out a worn leather folder. "After I read her diary, I started investigating on my own. I didn't trust the official version, a domestic accident, an unfortunate fall." He opened the folder, revealing newspaper clippings, official documents, and photographs. "I found inconsistencies in the police report, contradictory testimonies, and something even more disturbing." He handed Helen a photograph. It was Eliza, beautiful in a white summer dress, sitting on a garden bench, the same bench near the mausoleum. Beside her was another woman, older, with similar features. Her mother? Helen asked. Yes, Carmen Montague. A concert pianist who abandoned her career to get married. Adrian hesitated. What intrigued me wasn't the photo itself, but what I found on its back. He turned the photograph over. Written by hand in elegant calligraphy was, "The Daughters of Brighton, 1998. The Truth in the Blood." What does that mean? I didn't know until I found this. Adrian pulled another document from the folder, an old yellowed birth certificate. Eliza's original certificate, which differs from the official one in a crucial detail, the father's name. Helen felt a chill run down her spine. Who was her father? Edward Beaumont. My uncle, my father's younger brother, officially killed in a plane crash before I was born. Adrian stared at her intensely. Do you understand what that means? Eliza was a Beaumont. My cousin. The revelation hung in the dense air of the room. Helen tried to process the information, its implications, the impact it must have had on Adrian. But you didn't know? When you fell in love? No. Adrian ran a hand through his hair, a rare gesture of vulnerability. I believe Augusta knew, perhaps my father too, before he died. But they kept it a secret. Eliza was raised as another man's daughter, believing she was a Montague. Why would they hide it? Money, power, the classic Beaumont motives. Bitterness permeated his voice. Edward was the family rebel. He ran off with a pianist the family disapproved of. He was disinherited, and then conveniently died in an accident, leaving Carmen pregnant and alone. Helen approached a window and slightly drew back the curtain. The afternoon sun illuminated the gardens below, bringing a melancholic beauty to the property's organized decay. And when did Eliza find out? A few months before she died. She found old documents in Augusta's office, letters, photographs, records the matriarch kept as a guarantee of her power. Adrian joined her at the window. I believe that's what led to her obsession with that melody in her last weeks. She played the same sequence repeatedly, as if she were deciphering a code. What melody? In response, Adrian moved away and sat at the piano. His fingers hovered over the keys for a moment, as if recalling a long-forgotten movement. Then he began to play. It wasn't a piece Helen recognized, something fragmented, more a sequence of notes than a proper composition. It began in the bass register, ascended in an unusual progression and ended on that same clean key, F sharp. She played that continuously in her last week. Adrian stopped abruptly. The night she died, I heard that sequence from the library. When I got here, the room was empty. And then, his voice faltered. Then I heard the scream and found her at the foot of the stairs. Helen felt an inexplicable connection to those notes, as if they awakened something dormant in her memory. That doesn't sound like music. It sounds like a code. That's what I thought. But I could never decipher it. Perhaps it's not a musical code. Helen looked around the room as if the walls could offer answers. Perhaps it's something more literal. As she spoke, her eyes fixed on a detail she hadn't noticed before. A small ornamental lock on the window frame, almost invisible against the carved pattern of the wood. The lock was shaped like a rose, identical to the design on the silver key. Adrian, look at this. She pointed to the lock. He approached, his eyes widening in recognition. I never noticed that before. The key. Do you still have it? Adrian took the key from his pocket and handed it to Helen. She inserted it into the small lock and turned. A soft click echoed in the room, followed by a creak as an adjacent wall panel slid a few centimeters to the side, revealing a hidden compartment. Adrian seemed in shock. How did you... I don't know. I just felt it should be there. Helen couldn't explain the certainty that had guided her, the instinct that seemed to come from somewhere beyond her consciousness. They approached the compartment together. Inside, there was a carved wooden box with the Beaumont family crest. Adrian carefully took it out and placed it on the piano. The box was not locked. Inside, they found a yellowed envelope, a small dark glass vial, and a silver locket with a symbol Helen didn't recognize, a stylized tree with prominent roots. The locket Eliza mentioned in the diary. Adrian picked it up, examining the symbol. It belonged to her mother's family, the Montagues of the Valley. Helen opened the envelope. It contained several pages of a handwritten letter. She began to read aloud. My dearest Adrian, If you are reading this, it means my suspicions were correct and I will no longer be here to explain personally. I have discovered something that will change everything you believe you know about your family, about us, and about yourself. Augusta is not who she claims to be. She is not a Beaumont by birth, but by marriage. Before marrying your grandfather, she was Augusta Montague of the Valley, my great-aunt. Yes, we are connected by ties much older and more complex than we imagined. The accident that killed your Uncle Edward was no accident. Augusta orchestrated everything when she discovered he had fallen in love with my mother, Carmen, not out of disapproval of the relationship, but because my mother carried a secret that threatened Augusta's control over the Beaumont fortune. Carmen was the legitimate heir to part of the lands that now belong to the Beaumonts, lands your grandfather acquired through document forgery and manipulation. Augusta feared that if Edward discovered this, he might reveal everything. When I was born, Augusta made a deal with my mother. She would support us in secret, as long as we kept our distance and never claimed our right. My mother accepted, fearing for my safety. I grew up without knowing my true origin. The cruel irony of fate brought us together, Adrian. We fell in love without knowing we shared the same blood. When I discovered the truth, I thought of running away, of ending everything without explanations. But then I found something even more terrible. Helen paused, feeling the weight of the words. Adrian was pale, his eyes fixed on the paper, as if he could conjure Eliza's presence through the words. Continue, he urged, his voice almost inaudible. Helen resumed reading. Augusta was not content to manipulate our lives. She has manipulated the Beaumont lineage for decades, eliminating anyone who threatens her control. Your father, Anthony, did not die of a heart attack. The vial I found in her room contains an undetectable poison, the same one that caused the heart disease that killed your father. I confronted Augusta with my discoveries. I thought she would deny it, that there would be some explanation. Instead, she smiled and said I was smarter than I looked. Then she made a proposal. I could join her, learn her secrets, inherit her power. All I had to do was end our relationship and swear loyalty to her. I refused, of course. I said I would tell you everything. That's when I saw Augusta's true face. Not that of a fragile old woman, but of a predator cornering its prey. I fear my days are numbered, Adrian. If anything happens to me, do not believe the official story. Seek the truth in the blood, in the notes, in the key. And know that despite everything I discovered, my love for you was never a lie. Perhaps it was forbidden. Perhaps it was condemned by ties of blood, but it was real as life itself. There is one last thing you should know. Augusta is looking for someone, a young woman with the blood of the Montagues of the Valley, a direct descendant of my mother's sister, who fled to New Hampshire decades ago. Augusta believes this person is the key to something greater, something related to an ancient promise made between our families. Protect yourself, my love, and if one day you find this person, protect her too. Augusta will not hesitate to use her for her purposes, just as she tried to use me. With eternal love, Eliza. A sepulchral silence fell over the room as Helen finished reading. The sun had moved, casting long shadows into the corners of the room. Adrian remained motionless like a statue of pain and revelation. Augusta killed her. It wasn't a question. She killed Eliza to silence her. Helen felt a shiver run down her spine as she considered the implications of the letter. The descendant she mentioned. Could it be me? Is that why Augusta brought me here? Adrian stared at her, his eyes scanning every detail of her face as if seeing it for the first time. Helen Villar, what was your mother's maiden name? Montague, she replied, feeling the weight of that simple name. Louisa Montague. She was from rural New Hampshire, but never talked much about her family. She died when I was 7. And you were raised in a convent? St. Clair's. Father Anselm took me there after the funeral. He said it was my mother's wish. Father Anselm, who coincidentally has known Augusta for decades. Adrian stood up, a nervous energy propelling him. None of this is accidental, Helen. You were brought here with a purpose. But what? Helen looked again at the locket with the tree. And what does this have to do with the secret in the blood that Eliza mentioned? Adrian picked up the small dark glass vial from the box. This could be the poison she mentioned. Augusta may have used it to kill my father. And perhaps Eliza herself. We need to confront her. Helen stood up, determined. She owes us answers. No, Adrian held her arm. Augusta is dangerous. If she truly did what Eliza believed, she won't hesitate to do the same to us. Then what do you suggest? Flee. We need more proof. And we need to understand why you are so important to her plans. Helen walked to the window again, observing the gardens that were now tinged with the colors of dusk. Beaumont Manor, which days before had seemed merely an old and melancholic house, now revealed itself as the epicenter of a web of power, secrets, and death spanning generations. The melody, she turned to Adrian. You said Eliza played a sequence repeatedly. And in the letter she mentions the truth in the notes. What if the music was a clue? I've considered that, but I couldn't decipher it. Play it again, please. Adrian returned to the piano and reproduced the strange sequence of notes. Helen closed her eyes, letting the music penetrate not just her ears, but her memory, her blood. There was something in that melody that resonated in a deep place within her, like an ancestral call. F-sharp, she murmured. The clean key. The final note. It must be significant. As Adrian repeated the sequence, Helen examined the locket more closely. On the back, she noticed small inscriptions almost erased by time, letters forming a name, Maria del Valle, 1898, and below a sequence of numbers, 7, 5, 3, 12, 8, 6. Numbers. She showed Adrian. What if we convert the notes of the melody into numbers? In the musical scale, each note corresponds to a position. Adrian took one of the blank sheet music papers and began to write down the sequence, converting each note to its corresponding number in the C major scale. The final sequence was 7, 5, 3, 12, 8, 6. It's the same as the sequence on the locket. Helen felt a wave of chills. What does it mean? I don't know, but it must be a code for something. Adrian examined the numbers. Maybe coordinates? Or a date, Helen said suddenly. May 7th, 1936. The 8 and 6 together form 86. 1936, Adrian reflected. That's when my grandfather acquired the lands that expanded the Beaumont property. The lands that, according to Eliza, legitimately belonged to the Montagues of the valley. A noise in the corridor startled them. Footsteps approaching. Helen and Adrian exchanged alarmed glances. Quickly they put the items back in the box, except for the locket, which Helen instinctively put in her pocket. Adrian closed the secret compartment in the wall with the key. The door opened, revealing Mrs. Olivia, pale and agitated. Dr. Beaumont, Mrs. Augusta is asking for you and Miss Helen. She seems disturbed. Tell her we're coming, Olivia, Adrian replied with forced calm. We just need a few minutes. When the housekeeper left, Adrian turned to Helen. She knows. Somehow Augusta knows what we've discovered. How could she know? This house doesn't just have walls, Helen. It has eyes and ears. He held her hands, the contact sending waves of electricity through her body. Listen, we can't let her realize we know the truth. We need to play her game for now until we fully understand what's happening. Helen nodded, though her instinct screamed to flee that house and never look back. And then, when we have all the answers, then we will seek justice. For Eliza, for my father, for everyone Augusta manipulated and destroyed. There was an intensity in his eyes that hypnotized her. Despite the danger, despite the disturbing revelations, Helen felt irresistibly drawn to Adrian, as if somehow their destinies had been intertwined long before they met. There's something else you should know, she said, her voice low. Since I arrived, I've been having dreams, visions, of a woman playing the piano, of someone calling my name, not Helen, but Lena, as my mother called me when I was a child. And on the first day, I saw a woman in the garden during the storm looking at my window. Eliza. The name came out like a prayer from Adrian's lips. You saw her. How is that possible? I don't know. But in this house, the line between the living and the dead has always been thin. He hesitated, then continued. Helen, since you arrived, I feel something I haven't felt in 20 years. As if a part of me that died with Eliza is awakening. It's more than attraction. It's a recognition. Helen felt her heart race. Even knowing what we know now, that I might be a distant relative of Eliza, that I might share the same blood as you. What I feel for you is different from what I felt for Eliza. Adrian took a step towards her. It's as if you are the answer to a question I've been asking for 20 years. I can't explain it, but I know it's true. His proximity intoxicated her. For a moment, the danger, the secrets, the manner, everything disappeared. There was only the two of them, suspended in a moment out of time. "We will face Augusta together," Helen said, determination strengthening her voice. "And no matter what we discover, I won't let her do to me what she did to Eliza. I won't be another piece in her game of manipulation." Adrian touched her face gently, as if fearing she might disappear under his touch. "Nor will I allow it. I lost Eliza because I didn't see the truth in time. I won't make the same mistake twice." The sun had completely set, plunging the music room into gloom. The last rays of twilight cast shadows that danced across the walls like silent spectres. Somewhere in the manor, a clock struck 7 times. It was time to face Augusta Beaumont. Augusta awaited them in the main library, seated in her leather armchair like a queen on her throne. Despite her supposed blindness, her eyes followed Helen and Adrian's movements as they entered, a thin, blade-like smile drawn on her lips. "I see you found the music room." Her voice was calm, almost amused. "After all these years, Adrian has finally decided to face his ghosts." "How do you know where we were?" Adrian asked, maintaining his composure. "My dear nephew, this is my house. I know every breath that echoes within these walls." Augusta adjusted herself in the armchair. "Besides, you're not the only one who keeps keys to important places." Her gaze moved to Helen, assessing her as a predator assesses its prey. "Did you find interesting things there, I suppose? Perhaps a diary, a letter, a locket, perhaps?" Helen felt the object weigh in her pocket, but maintained a neutral expression. "Why did you bring us here, Mrs. Augusta? What is your true purpose?" The matriarch smiled, revealing teeth perfectly preserved for her age. "Straight to the point. I like that about you, Helen. Or should I call you Helen Montague of the Valley? My name is Helen Villar. Names are masks we wear, dear. What matters is the blood." Augusta stood up with surprising agility for someone her age. She walked to a bookshelf and pulled out a thick book, revealing a secret compartment from which she took a folder. "Like the blood that runs in your veins. The same blood that ran in your mother's veins. Louisa Montague of the Valley, who so conveniently changed her surname when she fled to rural New Hampshire. The same blood that, through generations of carefully arranged marriages, carries what the Beaumonts desire most." "And what would that be?" Adrian asked, tense. "Legitimacy." Augusta opened the folder, revealing old documents and a detailed map of the property. "The entire Beaumont fortune was built on theft. Your grandfather, Alexander Beaumont, was an ambitious man, but unscrupulous. The lands where this manor was built, the grounds that gave rise to the family's first businesses, everything was taken from the Montagues of the Valley through document forgery and, when necessary, violence." "So Eliza was right," Adrian said, his voice laden with pain and anger. "You manipulated everything. You killed my father, you killed Eliza. Your father was weak, Adrian. He began to question the family's methods, threatened to reveal secrets that would destroy everything we built." Augusta spoke without remorse, like someone discussing the weather. "As for Eliza, well, she discovered too much. I made a generous offer, which she refused. The consequences were inevitable." Helen felt nauseous at the woman's calculating coldness. "And me, why bring me here?" "Because you, my dear, are the last direct descendant of the Montagues of the Valley. The only one with a legitimate right to claim the lands." Augusta smiled. "But there's more, much more." She approached Helen, her eyes shining with a feverish intensity. "There's an ancient curse on this land, did you know? It says that the stolen blood will exact its price, that the last daughter of the Valley will bring justice. For 20 years I sought you, following rumors, clues, genealogies. When I finally found you, I needed to bring you here to see for myself if it was true." "What truth?" "That you are the reincarnation of the spirit that protects these lands. The same spirit that inhabited Eliza, that guided her to the truth." Augusta touched Helen's face with cold fingers. "Look at her, Adrian. Don't you see the resemblance? Not in appearance, but in essence. In the fire in her eyes. In the way she defies destiny." Adrian took a step forward, placing himself between Helen and his aunt. "Enough manipulations, Augusta. Enough lies. We have enough evidence to destroy the Beaumont legacy, to expose your crimes." The matriarch laughed, a surprisingly jovial sound. "And you would destroy yourself in the process, nephew. All your fortune, your position. Everything you are comes from what the Beaumonts stole. I don't care. Really. Augusta cast a shrewd glance at Helen. And what will happen to her when the truth comes out? When it's revealed that she is the legitimate heir to part of the fortune? Will the authorities believe the coincidence of her coming to work in this very house? Or will they see a manipulative seductress, planning to take control as she did with poor Adrian Beaumont's vulnerable heart? Helen felt a shiver run down her spine. Augusta was right. The truth, when exposed, could turn against them in unpredictable ways. "What do you want, Augusta?" she asked, keeping her voice firm. "What is your proposal?" A triumphant smile illuminated the matriarch's wrinkled face. Finally, someone sensible. "What I want is simple, continuity. I am old. My time is running out. I need to pass on my knowledge, my power to someone worthy." "Someone manipulable, you mean?" Adrian interjected. "Someone with the right blood," Augusta corrected. "I tried with Eliza, but she was too stubborn, too idealistic. You, Helen, have the strength she lacked. And you have Adrian by your side, not against you." The proposal hung in the air like an invisible poison. Helen looked at Adrian, seeing in his eyes the same conflict she felt. Augusta's offer was tempting in its simplicity: power, wealth, security. But the price would be their souls. It was then that Helen felt the locket in her pocket warm, as if responding to some invisible energy. She took it out, observing the tree symbol that now seemed to pulse with a life of its own. "No," her voice came out, stronger than she expected. "I will make no deal with you, Augusta. Neither I nor Adrian. The Beaumont legacy can crumble, or we can rebuild it with truth as its foundation. But I will not perpetuate the cycle of lies and manipulation you created." Augusta's expression hardened, the mask of affability falling away to reveal the matriarch's true face. "Foolish! Do you think you have a choice? That you can simply refuse my offer and walk out of here?" "We have exactly that, a choice." Adrian positioned himself beside Helen, his fingers finding hers in an intertwining of hands that sealed an alliance stronger than words. "And we choose the truth no matter the price." Augusta studied them for a long moment, the calculation visible in her opaque eyes. Then, surprisingly, she smiled, a genuine, almost proud smile. "You are stronger than I thought, stronger than Eliza was." She walked to the window, observing the night that had fallen over the property. Perhaps it is as it should be. The blood of the valley and the Beaumont blood, united not by manipulation but by choice. Helen and Adrian exchanged confused glances. The change in Augusta's attitude was disconcerting. "What are you saying?" Adrian asked, cautious. "I am saying, my dear nephew, that you have passed the test." Augusta turned to face them. "The curse I spoke of is real. For generations the Beaumonts prospered through deceit, but each generation paid a terrible price: short lives, tragic loves, devastating losses. The only way to break this cycle is for a Beaumont and a daughter of the valley to unite voluntarily, out of love, not out of obligation or manipulation." "That doesn't make sense," Helen argued. "How you killed Eliza, you confessed it." "No, dear. I didn't kill her. I tried to save her." Augusta sighed, an expression of genuine regret crossing her face. "Eliza discovered the truth about her birth, about the theft of the lands. She confronted me, yes. I offered her to join me, yes. But when she refused, I tried to protect her. I told her to flee, to leave Adrian, to start a new life away from the Beaumont curse." "Then how did she die?" Adrian asked, his voice trembling. "The house, Adrian. This manor is imbued with the resentment of the valley, with the blood spilled for the Beaumonts to prosper. Eliza felt it, began to hear voices, to see things. The night she died, she was in a trance, playing that melody obsessively. I believe she saw or heard something that frightened her, that made her run. The rest was what you found." Helen felt a shiver run down her spine as she remembered the figure in the garden during the storm. The vivid dreams, the sense of familiarity the manor had awakened from the very first day. "The house is cursed." "Not the house, but the legacy built upon it," Augusta replied. "A legacy that can only be purified when justice is restored, when truth is recognized, when the stolen blood is honored." The locket in Helen's hand pulsed again, hot as a burning ember. Instinctively, she pressed it against her chest, feeling a wave of energy course through her body. "Is that why you brought us here?" "To break a curse. To give you the chance that Eliza and Adrian didn't have," Augusta replied. A chance to choose freely with all cards on the table. Without lies, without manipulations. Adrian looked at his aunt with distrust. Why would we believe you now? You don't have to believe. Just see for yourselves. Augusta walked to a shelf and took out a small box, handing it to Helen. Open it. Inside was a second locket, identical to the first, but with a different detail on the back. The name engraved was Adrian Beaumont and the date, his birthday. This locket was made for you on the day you were born, Adrian. Your father insisted, despite my protests. He knew the legend. He knew that one day you would find the last daughter of the valley. He hoped you could do what previous generations failed to do, restore balance. Helen looked at the two lockets, feeling the invisible connection between them. What should we do? The choice is yours. You can expose everything, destroy the Beaumont legacy, face the consequences, or you can accept the past and build something new upon it, something based on truth and justice. Augusta looked deeply into Helen's eyes. But most importantly, you must choose each other, not despite the past, but with full awareness of it. Adrian took the locket from Helen and placed it beside his own. Together, the symbols of the two families seemed to complete each other, forming a single tree with deep roots and branches reaching towards the sky. I always felt there was something greater connecting us, he said, looking at Helen. From the very first moment, it was like recognizing a part of myself in you. Helen felt tears in her eyes, not of sadness, but of a profound understanding that transcended rational explanations. It's as if my soul knew you even before we met. Augusta watched the scene with a serene, almost maternal expression. Beaumont Manor was built to be a monument to power and wealth. Perhaps now it can become a symbol of redemption. Outside, the rain began to fall again, but unlike the previous storms, this one was soft, almost musical in its constant rhythm. The manor, which had always seemed oppressive and somber, suddenly felt lighter, as if an invisible weight had been lifted from its foundations. Helen looked at Adrian, seeing in him not just the man she had fallen in love with, but a fellow traveler, someone with whom she could face the past and build a future. It didn't matter what blood ran in their veins. It didn't matter the names of their families. What mattered was the choice they made now, freely and consciously. I don't know what the future holds for us, she said, intertwining her fingers with his. But I know I want to face it by your side. Adrian leaned in, holding her face in his hands with a reverent delicacy. Helen Villar or Helen Montague of the Valley, or whatever your true name, I choose you. Above any legacy, above any curse or blessing. Their lips met in a kiss that sealed more than a promise of love. It sealed a pact of truth, a commitment to face the past, to free the future. And when they parted, both felt that something fundamental had changed, not just between them, but in the very essence of Beaumont Manor. Augusta smiled, observing the union that generations had awaited. The last daughter of the valley and the heir of the Beaumonts, united not by obligation or manipulation, but by conscious choice. The cycle of deceit and betrayals finally broken. Outside, as the gentle rain washed the manor's gardens, a pale figure watched from the edge of the lake. Dressed in white black hair framing a serene face, Eliza Montague Beaumont smiled. Her spirit, trapped for 20 years between two worlds, finally found peace knowing that truth had triumphed, that love had conquered fear, that justice, though delayed, had finally arrived on the highest hill of Newport, where secrets would no longer hide in the shadows, but would blossom in the light of reconciliation. And so,